and welcome viewers. I'm Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump has stated that negotiations over the proposed peace plan for Gaza have been very successful and expects the first phase of the plan to be completed by the end of the week. A 17-year-old boy and a 43-year-old woman were killed while 14 others were injured in a shooting in Alabama's capital, Montgomery. Police say that multiple individuals pulled out firearms and started firing shots. No arrests have been announced so far and an investigation is underway. Activists detained by Israeli authorities from the Global Sumud Flotilla continue returning home after they've been deported. Citizens from Spain, Tunisia have now landed in their home countries. Police are investigating the crime scene in Sydney's inner west after a man allegedly fired around 50 bullets at passing cars from his property, wounding at least 16 people. The suspect is under custody and 2 rifles have been recovered from the scene. Wildfires have destroyed nearly 400 hectares in the northern area of the French island of Corsica. Now, according to authorities, nearly 180 firefighters, 50 vehicles and 4 aircrafts were mobilized to tackle the blaze. France has announced the composition of a new government led by Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. Lecornu's 2 predecessors were ousted over efforts to rein in France's budget deficit, which is the largest in the Eurozone. This will be the 5th French government in the last 2 years. Australia has signed a new defence agreement with Papua New Guinea, its first in more than 70 years, as Canberra seeks to counter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Rescue operations in Indonesia's tragic school roof collapse has reached the final stage as the death toll now climbs to 49. All right, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. Iranian Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi has stated that the recent Cairo agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency can no longer serve as basis for cooperation. He has now cited the enforcement of the UN snapback mechanism as a factor that has changed circumstances and complicated diplomacy. The September agreement has established a new framework for IAEA inspections requiring approval from Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Now, the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has warned that the snapback mechanism triggered by Britain, France and Germany in August would only hinder negotiations and make diplomacy more challenging. He has reiterated that Iran has not sought nuclear weapons nor escalation and that diplomacy remains the only viable path to resolving the nuclear issue. Listen in to what he had to say.
خب الان این اهرام رو به کار گرفتن و نتیجهش رو هم دیدن. هیچ اتفاقی نیفتاد که بتونه مشکلی رو حل بکنه و صرفاً دیپلماسی رو سخت‌تر و پیچیده‌تر کرده. فکر می‌کنم یک تجربه ثابت شده هست که هیچ راه حلی به جز یک راه حل دیپلماتیک مذاکره شده در خصوص برنامه هسته ایران.
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Yossi Kupawasser, Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us from Tel Aviv. Quite a statement has been put out by the Iranian foreign minister with regards to the September agreement inked in Cairo with the IAEA. It is crucial that this international body inspects Iran's nuclear ambitions and nuclear sites. What do you think are the implications now that Iran has stated that this deal with IAEA is invalid? What sort of mechanism would now be followed to monitor Iran's nuclear program?
Well, first of all, good morning and thank you for having me. Well, I think that we shouldn't be too much impressed by these Iranian threats. Iran did not cooperate with the IAEA before the snapback. It has been cheating the IAEA for years now. Unlike what they're saying that they were not trying to achieve nuclear weapons, the truth was that they had a very active military nuclear weapons program, and that was destroyed in June by Israel and the United States. And so we don't have to take Araghchi's threats at face value. It's just an attempt to threaten the international community so that they will give up the sanctions against Iran, because these sanctions are putting a lot of pressure on the Iranian regime. The economic situation in Iran is bad anyhow, and with these sanctions, it's going to get even worse. The Iranian rial is falling and collapsing, and they are trying through threats to save what they can from their economy. But this is not going to work because nobody believes Accuse, not the Europeans, not the Americans, not the IAEA itself. The International Atomic Energy Agency itself said that they cannot buy the story that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon program. So that's where we stand. And what needs to happen is for Iran to accept what is expected from it to allow the inspectors to have full access to everything in Iran, and to give guarantees that they are not going to be involved in a project to acquire nuclear weapons in the future. And first and foremost, to give up the idea that they would have the ability to enrich uranium to any level.
Indeed, and speaking about the snapback sanctions in itself, what impact would this have on the Iranian economy? Would this isolate Iran even further?
Of course it will, because this means that some of the money that the Iranians have in Western countries is going to be taken by the local authorities, and the Iranians are not going to be able to use it. And there are other steps that are mainly focused on preventing Iran from having the capability to produce nuclear weapons and to enrich uranium and to move forward on other military projects. So this is all going to put more pressure on Iran, and I hope that the Iranians will understand that there's no other option but to accept the demands of the international community.
In fact, earlier, after the US strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, Iran had threatened to pull out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Do you think they would go ahead with this step now?
This is an empty threat. They do not cooperate with the NPT anyhow. In spite of them being signatories to the NPT, they actually were moving towards having a nuclear weapon. Just the opposite of what the NPT is demanding from them. These are cheaters, professional cheaters, and we should not be impressed by their threats. If they want to leave the NPT, they can leave the NPT. They were never real members of the NPT. They did exactly the opposite of what the NPT was demanding them to do. They did not declare all kinds of facilities that they had. They didn't declare about uranium and enriched uranium that they had. They breached the NPT every morning. So threatening to leave the NPT is a very strange threat coming from Iran.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking our time, sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the Middle East towards Europe. We're now learning that Ukraine's overnight attack on Russia's Belgorod region has caused significant power outages, leaving thousands of residents without electricity. Now, according to the regional governor, while power has been restored in nearly 34,000 households, around 5,400 people across 24 municipal areas remain in the dark. Listen in to what the regional governor had to say.
Недобрый вечер, к сожалению, для Белгородского района. Сейчас пока не понимаем, для какого еще количества населенных пунктов Белгородской области. Очередной ночной обстрел. Есть повреждения энергетики. Сейчас все аварийные бригады выехали на место. Сам еду к месту прилета. Сейчас разберемся в масштабах случившихся.
Meanwhile, the power supply situation at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant remains tense but is reportedly under control, according to the RIA. In related news, a fire broke out at a security staff building at Russia's Tops oil refinery following a drone attack, but authorities quickly extinguished the blaze. The refinery itself was targeted by drones earlier, but no casualties were reported. Shifting focus to more developments, rescue operations are underway on the Tibetan slopes of Mount Everest after a blizzard stranded hundreds of hikers over the weekend. The incident occurred during the start of China's 8-day national holiday as tourists trekked towards Everest's eastern face. A few eyewitness videos taken over the weekend shows hikers wading through deep snow and poor visibility. Meanwhile, Chinese state media has reported that authorities have guided some 350 trekkers back to safety and that they have reached the small township of Kudang in Tibet. Additionally, contact has been established with more than 200 remaining hikers. But heavy snow and rainfall continues to make rescue operations challenging, blocking paths and roads in the Himalayas. Moreover, guides have described the snowfall as unusually heavy for this time of the year, while rescuers are working to navigate the hikers safely through the hazardous conditions. Shifting focus to what's happening in Mexico, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has delivered her first State of the Union address. Now, in the address, Sheinbaum has stated that she is confident that the Mexican government will reach a favorable agreement with the United States and other nations regarding trade. She's also stated that the Mexican government will work to boost local technology. This comes as the government pushes Made in Mexico projects to develop electric vehicles, semiconductors, satellites and drones. Mexico has been at odds with the United States over tariffs and the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is up for review in 2026. Now, during the address, President Sheinbaum has presented her government's achievements during its first year in office. Listen in to what she had to say.
Estoy segura que llegaremos a un buen acuerdo con Estados Unidos y todas las naciones del mundo con relación a nuestras relaciones comerciales. En las próximas semanas estaremos presentando el prototipo del vehículo eléctrico línea, los avances del taller de diseño de semiconductores y también los proyectos de satélites nacionales y de un vehículo aéreo no tripulado producido 100% en México. Esto es parte de un proyecto ambicioso que presentaremos en las próximas semanas, que le llamamos México, País de Innovación, que incluye el desarrollo del Laboratorio Nacional de Inteligencia Artificial.
With us on the broadcast is Dr. Sharat Kohli, senior economist, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX. Now, Mexico too had been a target of Trump's tariff hikes earlier itself. Meanwhile, it is on a quest to make in Mexico. Where do you think the discussions, the negotiations between Mexico and the United States will be headed to next? And do you think that they will manage to boost domestic manufacturing in order to counter Trump's tariff policies?
Well, Pia, greetings to you and NewsX World viewers. I think the road ahead is not as easy as President Claudia Sheinbaum feels, because Mexico borders US, and President Trump's Make America Great Again, one of the policy initiatives or one of the principal intent behind this whole tariff war is bringing manufacturing into the United States. And we should also not forget, Pia, that the largest trading partner of US is Mexico. The total bilateral trade between the two countries is almost close to $1 trillion. So practically anything and everything, if I make a list of what all is being imported and exported, I'll probably burn away the rest of the time of your bulletin. Everything is being, traded because it shares a very, very porous border, which President Trump is, intending to do the entire thing with a wall to prevent illegal immigration into the US. So the road ahead is not easy, although Sheinbaum enjoys a 70% approval rating in Mexico. She's a very, very popular leader there. And her intent is to bring manufacturing, as we just heard, of satellites, semiconductors, and so and so. But the problem here is that this is a very strange situation as far as US is concerned, because US cannot ignore Mexico. At the same time, US cannot afford to let Mexico go off as well, as far as tariffs are concerned. We know that there are tariffs on, for example, cars, there's 50%. On some other products, there's 25%. Steel, aluminum is 50%. Cars is 25%, I beg your pardon. So I think the tariffs are still there, but there has been a 90-day suspension to discuss and find out a way, because the volume of trade is so large and dependence on some of the items is so heavy that US will find very difficult, and same goes for Mexico. Mexico is going to find it very difficult to set up those factories, bring in investments from US especially, because President Trump is going to be opposing it. And also we should not forget, Pia, that there is a trade deficit with US has, and the trade deficit is very, very large. It's almost close to, I mean, if I divide $1 trillion into half, about $600 billion is the export being made by Mexico, is the export from US to Mexico. So I think the trade deficit is what also bothers President Trump. We should not forget, every time he talks about levying these tariffs, he does refer to the trade deficit. So it's a very tricky situation. It's not as easy. I think there are plus and minus points on both the countries. Mexico on one side is dependent on US, and I would say the US also to a very large extent is dependent on Mexico on so many common use items, Pia, for that matter.
So you've pointed out to the fact that there are challenges. For the benefit of our viewers, could you explain what sort of challenges could Mexico face if it goes ahead with this particular plan?
Well, the challenges are quite similar, Pia, to what challenges that President Trump is facing with regard to China. Now, I'll give you an example of China to help you understand better. China has got control over the rare earth magnets. Now, the reason why China was given a 90-day extension, well, countries like India, it did not take much time for President Trump, India and Brazil for that matter, it didn't take President Trump much time to levy 50% tariffs. Whereas on China, it gave a 90-day extension. So what President Trump is trying to do, if he's seeing countries on which there are certain items being imported without which, I put this in inverted commas, without which US cannot survive even for a week. So with those countries, either he's given the extension or he's probably procrastinating the deliberations to see that some kind of deal is reached. So the challenges before Mexico would be, because most of the investments in Mexico, they come from the US. So whether US investors would like to invest in Mexico, whether it is semiconductors, however, Mexico cannot also afford to take the risk of closing the doors to America and inviting these investments from elsewhere. So it's a catch-22 situation. Obviously, the statements that come out from the heads of the state, especially Shane Baum right now, I think they have to be sounding positive politically. You have to be politically correct while making a statement. But on the ground, the situation, as far as my analysis is concerned, is very challenging, very complicated, Pia.
Indeed. And speaking of Donald Trump, we do know that he is known for speaking his mind. How do you think he would react to these statements coming in? Because Trump has been pushing for domestic manufacturing within the United States as well. And he is looking at striking favorable deals that could bring in and usher in more investments into the US economy instead of investing in other countries.
Absolutely. That's what I said in the beginning, Pia, that President Trump is not going to like that the factories being set up rather in Mexico than in the United States. So I have a feeling that a solution to this problem lies somewhere in between, that to a certain extent, Mexican businessmen or Mexican industry stalwarts may have to agree to make some investment in the United States. And to a certain extent, then Mexico would be allowed to set up or invite that investment in the country. The problem here, the main problem here is that the two economies are so deeply entwined to each other that it's very hard for America to have a similar attitude as it did for India. It cannot afford to do that to Mexico. Whatever President Trump may like to say about illegal immigration, building a wall and so. But the fact of the matter is that it cannot afford to do without the items which Mexico has been exporting. It ranges from tomatoes to some of very sophisticated machinery, Pia, at this point of time. I'm sure President Trump and his trade representative team is having a tough time to frame a deal. And I'm sure Claudia, the president of Mexico, is going to find a way out as to how this is going to be resolved. I am personally eagerly waiting for the 90-day period to be over. whether there'll be another extension or will things be resolved within that 3 months' time.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your perspective on this very crucial development. More news we're tracking in at the moment. Former Mexican international footballer Omar Bravo has been arrested on suspicion of child sexual abuse. The 45-year-old was taken into custody in Zapopan, Jalisco, following allegations that he abused a teenage girl on multiple occasions over recent months. Authorities indicate there may have been previous similar incidents as well, and an investigation into this is ongoing. Bravo is known for his career as a striker with Guadalajara's Chivas. He has also represented Mexico at major international tournaments, including the 2004 Athens Olympics and the 2006 World Cup in Germany. The Jalisco prosecutor's office says that Bravo is expected to appear in court soon as investigation continues. Fans, meanwhile, have expressed mixed reactions on social media, with some showing support while others voiced concern. Legal representatives for Bravo have not yet responded to requests for any comment. All right, viewers, some breaking updates we're tracking on the broadcast at the moment. Spanish activists from the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Flotilla have arrived in Madrid alleging mistreatment and rights violations by Israeli authorities. The activists now claim that they were denied medicines, access to lawyers and their family as well as consular assistance while in detention, and suffered abuses from police. The flotilla, which set sail in late August, was the latest attempt to challenge Israel's naval blockade of Gaza. The flotilla had about 40 boats carrying humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza, even as the United Nations has pointed out that a famine is currently taking place and that the people of Gaza are suffering. Israel has called the blockade legal and the flotilla a provocation, and has deported at least 170 of the more than 450 activists detained. Israel has also denied any allegations of mistreatment that have come forth. In fact, some of the activists have also alleged that Greta Thunberg, Swedish climate campaigner who was detained, was also in fact mistreated by Israeli authorities. Clearly, you can see breaking updates coming in. Spanish activists from the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Flotilla have arrived in Madrid, and they are alleging mistreatment and rights violations by Israeli authorities. Israel, in the meantime, claims that there is no mistreatment that had taken place and has denied all allegations leveled against it. More news coming in, this time from France. French President Emmanuel Macron has accepted Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's resignation. The presidency stated, plunging the European nation further into political deadlock. Macron named Lecornu last month to the post, but the largely unchanged cabinet lineup he unveiled late Sunday was met with fierce criticism across the political spectrum. And breaking news coming in, French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has now resigned, and French President Emmanuel Macron has now accepted his resignation. This, of course, plunges the European nation further into political deadlock. In fact, what we'd recently seen was the new government was recently sworn in. The composition was also accepted. Lecornu's two predecessors were in fact ousted over efforts to rein in France's budget deficit. Now, France's budget deficit is the largest in the Eurozone, and what we've seen is recently was the formation of the fifth French government in the last 2 years, and now that too seems to be breaking down, considering the fact that French President Emmanuel Macron has just accepted Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's resignation. He had put in his papers. Remember, Macron had named Lecornu as the Prime Minister last month itself, but the largely unchanged cabinet lineup he had unveiled was met with fierce criticism as well, which has prompted his decision to put in his papers. People from across the political spectrum in France had in fact fiercely criticized, particularly on social media, the composition of the French government. In fact, the major changes that had taken place was that the Secretary General of the Presidency, Emmanuel Moulin, announced these changes. In fact, Roland Lescure, close ally of Emmanuel Macron, was announced as the finance minister, replacing Bruno Le Maire, who was then allocated the defense portfolio, and other ministers who had retained their posts included Jean-Noël Barrot as the foreign affairs minister and Bruno Retailleau as the interior minister and Gerald Darmanin as the justice minister. But this did not go down well, clearly, with the people of France, who expressed fierce criticism across the political spectrum. And now, of course, we're learning that French President Emmanuel Macron has accepted Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's resignation, and this has now plunged the European nation further into political deadlock. Shifting focus to what's taking place in Indonesia. Now, according to the National Search and Rescue Agency Operations Director Yudi Bramantio, 54 victims have been pronounced dead, and their bodies have now been recovered after the tragic incident which occurred last week at the Al-Khozni Islamic boarding school in Sidoarjo in East Java. Remember, a part of the multi-story building suddenly gave way during afternoon prayers, and rescue teams were working round the clock, initially trying to remove the rubble with their hands, and then later on, after taking permission from the families of those trapped, used excavators as well. They've now recovered dozens of bodies from the rubble. In fact, listen in to what the authorities had to say.
Total dari korban semuanya ada 154 orang, yang selamat ada 104, kemudian yang meninggal 50, dan seperti saya sampaikan tadi masih dalam pencarian. Ini perkiraan masih ada 13 orang yang di reruntuhan gedung. Kami menargetkan dari BNPB hari ini kita akan selesaikan pencarian korban. Kami menargetkan dari BNPB hari ini kita akan selesaikan pencarian korban. Dari Basarnas maupun dari pihak Kodim sudah mengatur schedule. Diharapkan pada hari ini kita akan selesai evakuasi dari yang diperkirakan, saya ulangi, yang diperkirakan tinggal 13 orang.
Authorities say that illegal construction without the proper permits, including adding 2 floors to the original structure, led to the collapse. Experts have confirmed that the building failed to meet safety standards and could not support the additional load. Well, viewers, this is all the time we have for now.